So I want to jump in and get started with a controversial topic. This is something I talk a lot about on creativity, but when you're writing a book and you want it to be successful, your success is going to depend upon the amount of readers who enjoy a certain type of book, and then also whether or not your book fulfills the expectations of those readers. So that's something that's very difficult to hear from most authors, especially fiction authors, because almost all the time authors finish their book first. You've probably got a manuscript you've been working on, you're almost done, maybe you finished your first book. You didn't really consider the market or do any research. And that's fine because that's where you are, but in business, if you want to have a successful product, you research the market, you find a need or a want, and you build something that satisfies people who are looking for a certain thing. That's the easy way to make money with business. So if you're an author who wants to now sell your books and make some money or build an author platform, everything will be harder if you have a book that doesn't have a big audience. And that's not something that you might know right now because you built your book without doing any research. And I'm only pointing this out because this is probably going to be the biggest drawback and limitation and challenge that you have as an author. And so it's worthwhile to be aware of it, because in the future, maybe this book doesn't do as well as you had hoped. If you want to, now that you've got this new set of skills, if you want to try again and write a book that's more marketable, which is a process that most authors go through, almost always the first book is something that the author was passionate about, it's what they wanted to write. They realize actually not that many people are interested in it. It doesn't satisfy a lot of people, there's not a lot of demand. It's so hard to market a book that people aren't really that interested in. So if that's you, or you realize later that you might want to start writing books that have a big demand, that satisfy a lot of readers, because it's so much easier to be successful and to make money with that kind of book. And that's mostly just, it's market demand. So if you're writing, for example, if you're writing a classic Western, there are some hardcore classic Western fans, and all you have to do is find your readers and put your book in front of them. So there's probably enough, as long as you wrote a stereotypical classic Western. If you wrote something that's really weird and different that you think should satisfy those readers but doesn't because you wrote a different kind of book, that's a different thing. But even if you wrote something that has like not a huge market but a small market, you can still do pretty well as long as you find those readers. But you can't sell as many as you could if you sold something in a more popular market. So for example, my first mermaid romance, on the one hand, it's easier to stand out because there's not nearly as much competition for mermaid romances. On the other hand, if I had written a really good werewolf or vampire romance, I would probably sell 10 times as many copies with less work, because there's more, there's a bigger readership, they're hungry for those books. It also depends, like if you write young adult fiction, teen readers read 5 or 10 books a month, whereas adult readers, if you're writing like literary fiction, readers might read a couple books a year because they're busy or they're not that interested, and there's different kinds of readers who read at a different speed. And that affects your bottom line, that affects how many sales you're going to get. But even like comparing nonfiction to fiction, if you're writing self-help or finance, business, or what's the other one? Like spirituality or diet. There's very popular books in very popular markets. You have a lot more, you have more of a challenge because there's a lot more competition. And also, for example, if I was writing a diet book authors are very internet savvy, and it would be difficult to learn as much as you need to really compete against those thousands of diet books and to have a bestseller. But because I'm writing mermaid fiction authors aren't very good at this stuff anyway. So it's been very easy for me to rank very well for keywords. So when people search for things like best young adult mermaid fiction, they'll find my site on the first page of Google because there wasn't very much competition out there, and the authors who are writing that kind of fiction aren't really doing keyword or building an online platform the way that they should. But even though I'm getting some traffic for like the mermaid fiction readers, that's not really a huge demographic. So I'm not selling tons of that book. The other book I wrote is a dark fantasy romance based on Greek mythology. It's a more popular genre, and the book I wrote is more like the books that are selling really well on Kindle. So I did that on purpose. I don't think it's my favorite book, but it sells 4 or 5 times any of my other books. It's just a matter of, it's not necessarily branding or the cover or the title, because all of my books are pretty much the same. It's just demand. So if you wrote a book in a popular subject, it'll be easier to be more successful and sell more copies. Some authors will say stuff like, I could never write in a popular genre, and that's fine if that's you. I think it's great to be a full-time writer and to write books that readers love. I think it's more fun to do that than to write obscure books for yourself that nobody really gets, that don't, get good reviews or don't sell a lot of copies. So personally, I'm fine. I don't believe it's selling out if you're writing to please a market ship. I think it's a ridiculous idea anyway, just because it's implied that you're doing something shady or less artistic or less creative or less valuable, or that takes less skill. Like maybe you're not a real writer, you're a hack if you write popular fiction. I'm only trying to please readers and give readers a great reading experience. I don't think that makes me a hack. I think if you're a writer and you only focus on the art and the craft and disregard your market completely, it's not that you don't deserve success. You can still be successful, but you'll be successful on accident, and it's very unlikely, as opposed to caring about your readers enough to figure out who they are and what they want and to try to give them a great reading experience. It's either a reader-centered type of publishing or it's a selfish, you-centered type of publishing. So it's a sensitive issue, it's controversial, but my point in this video is only that you are already limited by the book that you've written. And that's something you need to know going forward, because if you're really struggling, you're really frustrated, you can fix the cover, you can do more advertising and marketing. But even if things are going really well, even if you're doing the best you possibly can, you're still going to be limited by the type of book that you wrote and how many readers are interested in that type of book. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in the next video, which is just about more how you can write a book that does satisfy readers. And I'll also talk a little bit more about nonfiction and fiction, because I know not all of you are writing the same type of book.